This is a can of tuna. They're cheap, which is fantastic, but a lot of people think they're boring, bland, not very good. Until today, I'm challenging myself to come up with 6 delicious recipes using just this can of tuna. After today, you'll never think about those boring, bland, over mayonnaise tuna salads again. Let's jump into our first recipe. We're gonna start this challenge by trying to do a better tuna sandwich. It means we're gonna use a cheaper can of tuna. This is tuna packed in sunflower oil. More on that a little bit later. I'm gonna prepare some vegetables. I wanna add some crunch into my sandwich, so I'm gonna cut up some celery as finely as I possibly can. You want it to look like this when you're done. And then I'm gonna use some shallot. You could use red onion here. You could use really any kind of onion that you want, or you could use no onion whatsoever. It's completely up to you. I like the taste of shallots. Again, we want these to be cut down as finely as we possibly can. And now we're going to use an anchovy.
Wait, what?
This is a little bit of a secret ingredient into this recipe, and it's optional, but it is going to make it taste incredible. It's not going to make it taste anchovy-y. It's going to give it a big umami boost. You could use fish sauce, Worcester, any of those things is going to make this taste a lot better. I like adding a little bit of green, so I'm chopping up some chive. A little bit of green goes a long way. Now, the key with this is to mix the tuna incredibly well. We want all of those big flakes broken down and mixed in with the mayonnaise. Then add your crunchy bits, in my case, my celery and my shallots. Mix again, add in your herbs, mix one final time. It's really hard to over-mix this. And now all we need to do is put it on a couple of pieces of bread. Make sure you spread it into all the corners, cut it into triangles. We've got a tuna sandwich. I love a tuna sandwich. I grew up on this. I think it's fantastic. One of the easiest uses of a can of tuna. So that's just the first recipe. That'll be a pretty good benchmark because I've got 5 more delicious recipes to show you in this video using only a can of tuna. And that includes a delicious, crunchy, and cheesy version of what we just did.
You guys enjoying that cheese?
But before we get to that, I think we need to take things up a level. We need to make something that you might find at a nicer restaurant, something that really emphasizes and showcases this really, really great ingredient. I'm gonna eat this before I go on because it's awesome. There are a lot of different qualities of tuna that you can use. The fancier you get, like this, will be packed in olive oil. Sometimes it'll be done in sunflower oil. Sometimes it'll be packed just in water. It's really your preparation that's going to dictate what kind of tuna you use. In this recipe, we're really gonna let the tuna be the star of the show, which is what you wanna do with the more expensive cans. No, I broke it. How am I gonna get in there? That was almost a really big disaster. Problem averted. Let's carry on with our tuna toasts. So I'm going to start with a nice big loaf of bread. Cut off a piece that I am going to toast. Don't make it too thick. You don't want too much bread in this recipe, but thick enough that it's going to hold up to a fair bit of ingredients we're going to put onto it. We'll get the toaster started, which gives us enough time to move on to the other components. In a medium-sized saucepan, I'm going to bring some water to a boil and put in 2 eggs. I'm making 8-minute eggs, so these will boil for 8 minutes and then go into an ice bath. This will completely stop the cooking. You can cook this a little longer if you like your eggs cooked a little bit more. Now let's make a paprika mayonnaise. To start off, put some store-bought mayonnaise into a bowl, and then I'm going to grate on some garlic, add a little bit of sherry vinegar, and then a fair bit of paprika. I'm using Spanish paprika here. Use as much as you like to get the color that you want. On to the third component. Here, we are going to do a mixture of some tomatoes. I have these really fresh cherry tomatoes that I'm just going to cut into half. You want the tomatoes to be in bite-sized pieces, so it's going to depend on the size that you have. And then I'm going to add a shallot again. Cut them down into the finest slices that you can. Put that in a bowl, add a fair bit of lemon juice, a little pinch of sugar, and a pinch of salt. That's going to balance all these flavors out really nicely. As luck would have it, our toast is completely done. We can start plating this up. I'll add my toast to the center of a plate, and then I'm going to drizzle on some of the olive oil that was in the canned tuna. Rub that on, sprinkle with a bit of fleur de sal, and then add my paprika mayonnaise. Don't go too heavy on the mayonnaise. We want this tuna to be the star of the show. Drop on some of our tomato and shallot mixture. Crack open that egg and just tear it by hand. We can be a little rustic with this. Put the egg right on top. Touch more of the fleur de sal. A couple turns of fresh cracked pepper, some parsley on top, and another drizzle of olive oil. So I may have made this a little bit too tall, packed a little bit too much on here, but it looks awesome. Really, really, I think, cool way to turn a can of tuna into something a little more fancy. Try and get a bit of everything. So good. Those 8-minute eggs, when they're still a bit jammy, I think are perfect. Really get that intense sort of tuna flavor. Let's move on to our next recipe. So in our next recipe, we are going to make a really, really simple, authentic Italian pasta. Pasta al tonno, pasta with tuna. I'm going to start some heavily salted water, and then I'm going to add some spaghetti. I'm going to cook this just a little bit less than the package says, because we're going to finish that in a sauce. To make our sauce, we're going to start by infusing some olive oil in garlic, which basically just means adding some garlic and some olive oil to a pan, heating it gently until the garlic is nicely browned. Be careful, you don't want to burn the garlic. Once it's nicely browned like this, just take it out, and we've got garlic in infused oil. I'm going to add some Italian red pepper flakes and let those toast for about 30 seconds before adding a can of whole tomato. I'm going to let that simmer for about 8 minutes until it's broken down, and then I'm going to add my tuna very carefully into the pan. I want to keep this as large as possible. And now the Italians are probably going to yell at me because I'm going to add a bit of fish sauce to boost the umami flavors. And then I'm going to take my pasta and add it right into the sauce, and then add a cup of pasta water. We'll help that oil and pasta emulsify and add a bit of salty flavor and make it really delicious. Give everything a toss. You can either use tongs or you can try and use the chef flip. Doesn't really matter how you do it. We're ready to plate this up. I'd never heard of this before. This was a brand new recipe for me. Uses a lot of great techniques that you use to make pasta, and it came together pretty quickly. The tomato and the tuna surprisingly goes really, really well together. I was a little skeptical of this dish. I thought, tuna, pasta, tomatoes, I don't think it's going to be that good. This is pretty tasty. So we made an authentic Italian tuna and pasta dish. Now we got to go back to something that I grew up with. We've got to make a cold tuna salad. Tuna pasta? No, tuna salad was the first thing we made. Anyway, let's make some tuna pasta. To start off, we need to make a dressing. We use mayonnaise and some creme fraiche. You could use sour cream here. It's a little hard to find where I live, so I'm going to use creme fraiche. Add in some whole milk and whisk this all together. Now we're going to amp up some of the flavors in here with some Dijon mustard, some fresh lemon juice, a bit of hot sauce, whichever one you like, Worcester sauce, Spanish paprika, some garlic powder, salt, and pepper. Mix all that together, and then we have to put that in the fridge until it's completely cooled down. Now, let's talk about our pasta. You can use whatever pasta you like. I've got these sort of elbow noodle-ish type things. On my package, it says 9 minutes for al dente and 11 minutes for soft cooked. Basically, you want to cook it more than the al dente. I'm going to go 11 minutes, maybe even a touch longer. We want this really, really tender, really, really soft. So I'm going to cook that, and we want it really soft so it's going to absorb the secret ingredient that we're going to put into this. We're going to add a fair bit of vinegar. Vinegar is going to brighten this salad up. Now, I'm using apple cider vinegar. You could use whatever vinegar you want. I mean, don't use balsamic vinegar, but white wine vinegars, apple cider vinegars, even red wine vinegar, I think would be pretty good with this. The vinegar is going to brighten this up, add a little bit of an acidic taste, which is really the second reason we do it, is to balance out that really, really fatty dressing that we just made a few seconds ago. This is going to take your pasta salads to a whole nother level. So now that everything is completely cold, we can start combining everything. I'm going to mix around the pasta a little bit more to just make sure that vinegar is integrated, and then add in my dressing. And I'm going to add some vegetables. I've got celery, carrots, shallot, chives, and of course, my tuna. Try and keep it as large as possible like we've been doing in the other recipes, and then just mix everything until it's completely combined, cover, and then back in the fridge to cool down completely. So our tuna pasta salad is in the fridge, needs to get super cold. It's gonna take about an hour, which is gonna give us enough time to do our next dish. We're gonna make a tuna noodle casserole. To start, we're gonna cut down some onion. I'm gonna cut this down basically into a really fine mince, and I'm also gonna prepare some red pepper. Just cut off the ends, and then cut it in half, and then take out the core. I like taking out this white part. It really intensifies the flavor of the red pepper. Once that's done, we can just cut this down into about the same size as our onion. The other thing that we're gonna do to boost the flavor of this casserole is add some mushrooms. I'm gonna cut these down into slices and then set that aside. Now, let's move on to our cheese. I'm gonna use cheddar cheese. There's lots of different cheeses that can go in here. Use whatever you like. Next, we're gonna use some potato chips to create a crunchy layer that goes on top. I'm gonna add those into my food processor and tear up a slice of white bread. I'm gonna add a handful of the cheese that I just cut down, some salt, some pepper, and then blitz that 6 or 8 times basically until you get something coarse that looks like this. Next, let's prepare our tuna. I'm gonna add several cans of tuna into a large bowl, and then I'm going to put a fair bit of lemon juice on this and some salt and pepper. I'm gonna mix that together and then let that sit while we prepare our pasta. There's lots of different pastas that work here, but I think a long egg noodle works best. So for this, I'm gonna use tagliatelle. Any egg pasta will work. I'm gonna add that into some salted boiling water and cook it as the package recommends for al dente. Once that's done, I'm going to set this aside. I'm probably going to bother the Italians again. I'm going to wash the pasta. This is a tip from America's Test Kitchen. This is going to prevent our casserole from getting too starchy, and it's also going to stop the noodles from cooking so that they don't get overcooked. Now, back in my same pot that I cooked the pasta in, I'm going to add a knob of butter, and we're going to start cooking down the mushrooms. We want to get all of the water out of these, so we're going to saute them for about 5 or 6 minutes. After about 5 or 6 minutes, you should have something that's brown, and it's going to add a lot of flavor into our casserole. This is what the mushrooms look like. We'll set those into the bowl that has the tuna and add another knob of butter into the same pot that we've been using and add in the vegetables, some onions and some red pepper. Cook those until translucent, about 5 minutes, and they look like this, and then into the bowl with the tuna and mushrooms. And last but not least, in the same pot, we're gonna make our roux. Add equal parts of flour and butter. Cook that for about a minute or two, and then add some cream and some whole milk. This is gonna start to thicken really, really quickly. Just stir it so some lumps don't form. And I've got some chicken stock, actually from a video on chicken pot pie I made a few weeks ago. Add that into the pan, bring it up to a boil, and it will start to thicken slightly. After about 5 minutes, we're going to take this off the heat completely, and then we're going to add in our cheese. Give everything a good stir so that the cheese is completely melted, and add in the tuna and vegetables from earlier into the sauce. Next, we're adding in the cooled down egg noodles and stirring again so that everything is combined. I'm going to add in some frozen peas, which is going to add a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of green. Season it with salt and pepper, and then we're going into a baking dish. Give it a little shake so that everything goes into the corners, and then layer on our potato chip and bread crunchy mixture. This is going in the oven. Let's check on our pasta salad. It's completely cooled off, nothing fancy to do. All we need to do is get this on a plate, and it's time to eat. I can smell it already. It smells like really fresh, I guess is the word. That vinegar really comes through. It's not overpowering though. It's good, but it needs a bit of salt. Ooh, and you know what's a good idea? I'm gonna dust it with a little paprika. It needed that little bit of salt. You know, you're gonna have to season it how you like. Let's check on our tuna casserole to see if we can get another dish out. My casserole spent about 12 or 13 minutes in the oven. You just want to cook it until it's golden brown. We got to let this sit for 10 minutes though. We're ready to cut into this. Just be a little careful. The longer you let it sit, the more set it's going to be. You know, this probably could have sat for a little longer, but I'm hungry. I want to try it. Really, really creamy from that sauce that we made. You know, the tuna still comes through, but there's a lot of things going on in here. The mushrooms add sort of a meaty flavor. The vegetables balance it out really nice. And I mean, it made a ton of food. So really, really good meal to feed a lot of people. Dish number 6, the last in our tuna challenge. And let's take things full circle. Let's go all the way back to that better tuna sandwich that we made at the beginning. And let's make another sandwich, but this time let's do a crunchy, a cheesy, a classic tuna melt sandwich. So like before, we're gonna start off with a can of tuna. We're gonna put that into a small bowl and add some mayonnaise. I am running drastically short of mayonnaise by this point. We're gonna start by making this crunchier by adding some panko breadcrumbs. Like before, we want to mix this really, really well. You really can't mix it enough. You want all those big flakes broken down. Basically a homogeneous mixture. I've got some really thick toast here. The key to this recipe and to getting a really golden brown crust on the outside is to use mayonnaise. A lot of people use butter, but I think mayonnaise gets you a better crust. I'm still going to use some butter. I'm going to melt that in a pan and then place my mayonnaise side down, pressing gently to make sure the entire piece of bread is in contact with the pan. And I get this about half done at this point because this is going to go into the oven. But first, I'm going to add my cheese on the bottom of each piece of bread. So you've got 2 pieces of cheese, and then my tuna basically goes in between. Press that down a little bit. This is going in the oven to melt the cheese without overcooking the bread. You'll have something that's really crispy. You'll have something that's really golden brown and delicious. Now all we have to do is cut that down into triangles like before. Super crunchy. The bread is delicious. The panko breadcrumbs in the center really amp it up a bit, and the cheese is really nicely melted. I mean, this is like a diner-style tuna melt. It's awesome. I said it was going to be lightly mayo, and I ended up using a whole can of mayonnaise. No regrets. Thanks for watching. See you next time. This is a smaller bottle of mayonnaise than I think I usually get, so it's not as bad as I think.